Welcome to the Lumenverse. Before we begin, are you listening to this while it's raining, or is it sunny where you are? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy our stories, please remember to like and subscribe. Now, let's begin. They called it the Sentinel, a towering skeleton of a lighthouse standing tall on a jagged cliff, where relentless waves crashed continuously. Its beams sliced through the mist like a spectral sword, yet it wasn't meant to operate anymore. Locals whispered in hushed tones that the lighthouse had been decommissioned 30 years ago, abandoned after its last keeper vanished into the night. No replacement came, no one tended to its upkeep, yet on certain eerie nights that elongated bone-white beam would glide across the dark sea, scanning the waters in a deliberate, methodical rhythm, as if seeking something, or someone. I was navigating down the coastal road, the relentless rain turning night into a dense fog that swallowed everything beyond headlights. Then, abruptly, the narrow, blinding beam of the sentinel pierced through the misty darkness, momentarily overwhelming my vision. When I mentioned this encounter to an old man in the next town over, he paused in his stirring of the coffee. "That light ain't for ships anymore," he murmured. "Then who's it for?" I inquired. He regarded me silently, his face betraying a hint of unease. The tales of the sentinel were many. Some fishermen claimed to have seen shadowy figures within the lantern room, their silhouettes outlined by the pale beam as they stood, their hands resting against the railing, and gaze directed seaward. Others reported the haunting sound of a low humming, echoing from the cliffs, neither the wind nor the waves, but a voice, whispering in a language unknown to their ears. One woman shared that curiosity had compelled her to investigate the open door of the lighthouse, its spiral staircase slick with sea spray. A pungent aroma pervaded the air, a mixture of rust and blood. The incessant downpour, it always seemed to weave itself into the tales that were told here, almost as if it held an uncanny awareness. Now, the story unfolds within the confines of an unremarkable apartment building, where some inexplicable presence within its walls longed for its existence to be acknowledged. I thought I had come across a hidden gem when I relocated into my apartment, an ancient brick structure adorned with creaky wood flooring, offering a rent that didn't drain my wallet. Those vents, though, were the only peculiar feature. Tall, black iron grates that slightly rattled as the heating mechanism activated. They carried a mild metallic scent, as though they had been left to weather in the rain. On the very first night I heard it, a soft, indistinct whispering, barely audible, as if someone were conversing above me. The only catch, I was on the top floor. The initial murmurs were barely perceptible, more like a hushed whisper than coherent words. I attributed it to the wind rushing through the ventilation system, until one night, I heard it distinctly call out my name, spoken with agonizing languidness. "Jameis." I lay motionless in bed, the rain pattering against the window. Despite the warm air around me, a cold shiver traveled down my spine. The eerie whisper resounded once more, edging closer in its impatience. "You're awake." I summoned the maintenance team to address the peculiar issue. Upon investigating the vent, the man who arrived turned pale. "This vent isn't linked to the building system," he explained. "It solely leads downward into darkness." "How far does it go?" I inquired. He shook his head, the recollection making him uneasy. "I dropped my flashlight in there. It never hit the bottom." That night, I conjured up a dream where I stood in my room, staring at the vacant hole in the wall. Slowly, something pale and damp began to crawl upwards from the darkness within. Its eyes. These tales have a way of making one contemplate the essence of our living spaces. The walls, the floors, the concealed corners that remain untouched for years. Yet sometimes, it's not the place itself that harbors menace. Our next narrative unfolds in the realm of a bus route that predominantly operates during the night. A route that the majority of city dwellers have grown increasingly reluctant to traverse. This particular bus stood out. No distinguishing marks, devoid of a route number or a company logo. The bus appeared to be quite antiquated, the windows coated with a layer of dust that seemed impervious to any attempt to clean them. It was whispered that the bus made its only appearance after midnight, each time accompanied by a downpour. One particular night, I found myself stranded in the torrential rain, and my rideshare app refused to cooperate. It was then that the bus materialized, its dim yellow headlights cutting through the torrent. The interior of the bus exuded a peculiar scent, a hint of earthy dampness alongside the sweet fading fragrance of decaying flowers. The bus seats, though worn and tattered, or the subtle imprints of someone having recently occupied them. Amongst the passengers in the bus, there were only two others. They sat perfectly motionless, their gazes fixed forward, neither of them displaying the slightest signs of respiration. The intensity of the rain escalated with the passing moments, accompanied by a notable change in the cityscape beyond the window. The streets appeared narrower, more labyrinthine, their structures warped as if the environment itself skewed and shifted. Despite the eeriness, the driver never deviated his gaze, only uttering the cryptic phrase, "Not yet, not yet." Once the bus came to a halt, I hurriedly stood up. The two additional passengers slowly turned their heads to gaze fixatedly in my direction, their mouths slightly agape, as if longing to speak. Entities exist to reflect the world back at us, but mirrors possess a unique power. They hold the capacity to open gateways to realms not meant for human eyes. This tale unfolds within the confines of a hotel room, where the mirror in question deviated from its ordinary nature. The hotel exuded an antique ambiance, its interior adorned with lavish velvet drapes and furnished with brass keys, eschewing modern keycard technology. I was assigned room 407, situated on the top floor and located at the end of the corridor. Upon entering my room, the first thing that caught my attention was the mirror. An oversized, imposing piece positioned right across from the bed, a reflection that seemed impossible to avoid. During the night, the steady patter of rain against the windows served as a subtle backdrop, but what disturbed my sleep was the faint sounds of movement. I jolted upright in bed, a chilling dread seeping into my bones. The mirror, softly lit by the dim glow from outside, revealed my own silhouette, but amidst the shadows, another figure loomed in the corner of the reflected room. Turning my head to confirm my fears, I discovered nothing in the corner itself. But when my gaze returned to the mirror, the figure stood closer, a woman dressed in a dark cloak, her face concealed just enough to hide her eyes. Her still hands hung like lifeless weights at her sides as she took another eerily silent step forward. It wasn't a scream that echoed through the room. It was a whisper, a sound so faint it felt like it was intended only for me. The mirror shivered as if reacting to a breath that misted the glass. Then, with an uncanny swiftness, the woman's foot passed through the reflection, treading into the room. In a panic, I yanked the blanket over my head, my heart pounding in my ears. When I finally braved a peek under the covers, the mirror lay empty once more. The third consecutive night was marked by a relentless downpour, the rain's rhythmic drumming creating a constant melancholic symphony against the glass. The world around appeared as if wrapped in a watery haze, with streetlights casting elongated reflections off the damp surface. Arriving home, my attention was immediately drawn to the unexpected object resting upon the doorstep, a package of plain appearance, devoid of any identifying markers. The parcel, now soaked through at its borders, was surprisingly lightweight as I scooped it up. However, within its depths, a soft shifting sound was faintly discerned. Inside the rain-soaked parcel, an old, tattered rag doll was revealed. With its crude face and broken eye, it exuded a sense of neglect and solitude. The mildew-scented fabric seemed to whisper tales of abandonment. Initially, I laid the doll on the kitchen counter, intending to dispose of it the following day. Yet as the night progressed, the sound of soft footsteps pierced through my slumber. Their slow, drawn-out rhythm, like a muffled heartbeat, was standing, its diminutive fabric limbs hanging loosely. Yet its stitched head was tilted upward, almost as though it was aware of my exact location. With a sudden flicker, the lights in the room flickered, and in the next instant, the doll vanished. Upon waking the next morning, my gaze returned to the kitchen counter, only to discover the doll once again situated where I had left it. This time, however, a distinct damp handprint marred the surface, a haunting reminder of a presence that was undeniably not mine. The woods surrounding my town possessed an uncanny tranquility, a stillness that felt out of place. As I stepped across the threshold, a dense silence enveloped me, an absence of sound that seemed to muffle even the most subtle noises. At the age of 17, I accepted a dare from a friend to traverse the entire path at night. Rumors about the area had circulated, tales of individuals who returned altered and the ones who never returned at all. The initial 10 minutes were comparatively uneventful, with the moon casting a pale light and the biting cold numbing my senses. As I advanced, a sight that defied reason materialized before me. A man-like figure, standing in the middle of the trail, his towering form brushing against the low-hanging branches of nearby trees. However, It was the figure's disconcerting visage that caught my attention, its head wrenched into a natural position, facing me with unblinking eyes that seemed almost lifeless. The creature glided silently towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though controlled by invisible strings. Each step it took created a sense of increasing heaviness in the air, making it increasingly challenging to draw in a breath. I finally staggered out of the woods, the abrupt surge of sound assaulting my senses. The wind, the rain, my ragged inhalations. My friend waited with a bewildered expression in his car. He insisted that over 2 hours had elapsed since my journey, yet my watch claimed only 20 minutes had passed. I swore never to return to the woods, yet occasionally, when solitude embraced the night, the deafening silence found its way into my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the chilling sense that the tall, unearthly figure was lurking close by, silently waiting. Some locales have the power to leave an indelible mark on you, even if you manage to escape untouched. As a child, I recall my grandmother possessing an elaborate mirror, meticulously crafted and framed in dark wood. Carved along the edges were vine-like tendrils adorned with delicate blossoms. She sternly warned me not to cast my gaze upon the mirror's surface for extended periods, and, above all, cautioned me never to engage in conversation with it. It was to be expected that curiosity would take root like an unruly weed upon being warned against indulging in a certain behavior. One overcast afternoon, as my grandmother slumbered upstairs, I stood before that ominous mirror. Initially, what appeared in the reflection was my own image, a pale face framed by disheveled hair. The longer I stared, the more disconcerting it became, as the lighting in the reflection diverged from the hallway's reality. The shadows in the mirror were more pronounced, shrouding the scene in an ominous intensity. I couldn't help but break my grandmother's warning, whispering softly, "Can you hear me?" To my horror, the reflection's smile broadened, even though my own mouth remained closed. My reflection's hands pressed against the glass. As rain intensified, pummeling the roof, a faint, imperceptible sound echoed in my thoughts. "Let me out." The hallway's lights flickered momentarily, plunging the space into darkness. In this fleeting moment, I thought I saw her fingers emerge from the mirror's glass surface, like tendrils breaching the barrier between worlds. I frantically rushed to my grandmother's room, recounting tales of the enigmatic girl in the mirror. To my astonishment, she reacted only with anger, promptly covering the cursed object with a sheet. Later that night, I jolted awake to the sound of fabric stirring. The sheet had vanished. From the shadows at the foot of my bed, a familiar silhouette materialized. That slow, deliberate smile graced her face once more. Despite my grandmother removing the mirror to the attic, the specter of the girl continued to plague me. Occasionally, I would catch glimpses of her within shop windows, or the reflections of darkened glass during mirrors can sometimes be gateways to realms beyond our own, but on occasion, it's the entity on the other side that first seeks entry. This narrative takes us back to the woods once more, not for the haunting secrets concealed within the dense forestry, but rather for the unsettling presence that may follow you upon your departure from this eerie realm. As I walked through the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Each time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, just the shifting shadows of the trees, swayed by the breeze. But the unease remained, a gnawing sense that something was following me, just out of sight. I quickened my pace, hoping to reach the edge of the forest as fast as possible. My heart raced and each breath came in short, ragged gasps. Every snap of a twig beneath my feet seemed unusually loud, the quiet forest magnifying every sound. Each rustling leaf or distant animal cry made me jump, my senses heightened with fear. Despite the adrenaline coursing through my body, I couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness. The woods seemed to go on forever, the trees forming a dense canopy that blotted out the moonlight. My imagination began to play tricks on me. Every shadow took on a menacing shape, every breeze a chilling touch. I was certain I could hear footsteps just behind me, light, quick, and silent. Yet each time I turned around, nothing was there. My legs ached with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep going, pushing my exhausted body to its limits. The rain began to fall, a heavy drizzle that clung to my clothing and turned the path beneath my feet into a slippery, muddy mess. I could barely make out the path ahead, the thick foliage blocking my vision. Panic flared within me as I realized I couldn't remember how long I'd been walking, or even where the exit was. It felt as though the forest was never ending, trapping me within its tangled grasp. I had been walking for what seemed like hours, my mind clouded with fear and desperation. The rain continued to fall, turning the ground beneath me into a treacherous mire. My breathing grew labored, each breath a struggle. As I pushed through the thick foliage, the path seemed to stretch on endlessly, a twisting, never-ending maze. I tried to quiet my racing mind, straining to listen for any sign of civilization beyond the confines of the oppressive forest. But all I heard was my own haggard breathing. My legs buckled as I slipped in the mud for what felt like the 100th time, sending me sprawling into the damp earth. I cursed under my breath, trying to ignore the scrapes and cuts that stung from the sharp twigs and stones. With a great effort, I managed to stand, leaning heavily on a nearby tree trunk for support. My head spun from fatigue, and the world around me seemed to blur. I had to push on. I forced myself to stagger forward, stumbling over roots that seemed to stretch across the path just to trip me. The rain continued to fall, its cold, relentless beat a constant companion. My clothes were now soaked through, and I shivered uncontrollably, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they might break. Panic flooded through me as I realized the futility of my situation. I was hopelessly lost, the forest seeming to swallow me whole as it had countless others before. I tried to slow my breathing, to calm the chaotic thoughts racing through my mind, but the shadows around me only deepened, the trees closing in like a prison cell. I felt trapped, the panic clawing at the edges of my consciousness, urging me to give in. I forced myself to focus on the present, to block out the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume me. One foot in front of the other, I told myself. One step at a time, I pressed on, each step more laborious than the last. My legs felt like lead, every muscle screaming in protest. My vision began to blur, the world blending together in a dizzying kaleidoscope. I fought the urge to collapse, knowing that if I stopped, I might not have the strength to start again. I reached out blindly, grasping at the trees to steady myself. Their rough bark scraped against my skin, but I didn't care. I had to keep moving. I don't know how long I continued on like this, staggering and stumbling through the darkness. Time seemed to lose all meaning, each second stretching into an eternity. My world had shrunk to the sounds of my labored breathing and the relentless beat of the rain. Every fiber of my being ached, but I refused to give up. I clung to the fading hope that, somehow, I would find my way out of this nightmarish forest. My mind became a hazy blur, my thoughts slipping in and out of focus like a fever dream. The world around me warped and twisted, shadows dancing in the corners of my vision. My body was pushed to its absolute limit. I could feel my heart racing, every beat a painful thump against my ribcage. As I struggled to keep moving, I started to hear voices in the distance, faint whispers that seemed to beckon me forward. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just a product of my exhaustion-addled mind. But as I stumbled closer, the whispers grew louder, words taking shape in the air like phantoms. Help me? I stopped in my tracks, my head reeling from the combination of fatigue and the unexpected voices. Was someone really out there, pleading for aid? I listened intently, trying to ignore the pounding of my heart in my ears. The words were clearer now, a desperate plea echoing through the forest. Please, anyone. My mind raced, my weariness briefly forgotten as adrenaline flooded my body. Someone was in trouble, and every instinct screamed at me to find them. Despite the overwhelming exhaustion that threatened to overtake me, I forced myself to move, drawn towards the source of the voice. My feet, now numb with cold and exhaustion, moved mechanically, carrying me forward despite every muscle in my body's protest. The rain continued to fall, and the voices became slightly more distinct, still faint, but closer now. I'm stuck, even in my weary state. My mind latched onto the words, hope fluttering within my chest at the realization that the person, whoever they were, was nearby. I pushed forward, each step a monumental effort as every fiber of my being screamed for rest. But the thought that I might find someone in need kept me moving. Please, find me. The words seemed to wash over me, a desperate plea cutting through the rain and the exhaustion that threatened to drown me. Someone was out there, lost and calling for help. I gritted my teeth, summoning the last shreds of my strength to press on. The darkness seemed denser here, the trees like black fingers clawing at the night sky. But there was something else, a faint, pale glow, barely visible through the undergrowth. I squinted through the darkness, trying to focus on the faint glow that danced in the distance. Was it a hallucination? A trick of my tired brain? I stumbled towards it, my legs feeling heavy and unresponsive. As I drew closer, the light became slightly brighter, a pale, almost ethereal glow that beckoned me forward, despite the exhaustion that seemed to drag me down with every step. I pushed on, the pale glow growing brighter with each staggering stride. It was almost like a lure, drawing me closer to it with an urgency that overrode my bone-deep weariness. I had no idea what was waiting for me in the clearing ahead, but a gut feeling told me I needed to find out. The air felt heavy as I approached the tree line. Expectant, thick, my heart thumped wildly, both from exhaustion and the anticipation building within me. The pale glow was now bright enough that I could make out shapes amongst the foliage. I drew in a shaky breath, pushing through a final stand of trees and stumbling out into a small clearing. My eyes took in the scene before me, and my heart seemed to stop for a moment. There, in the center of the clearing, a figure stood. They were partially hidden by a large tree, their features obscured in shadow. A mixture of emotions warred within me: fear, confusion, exhaustion, hope. Was this the person who had been calling for help? I took a tentative step forward, my eyes fixed on the figure standing before me. Despite the shadows that obscured their features, there was something distinctly human about them. "Hello," I called out, my voice betraying the exhaustion that coursed through me. The figure twitched, then slowly turned to face me. I squinted, trying to distinguish features in the dark. The figure was slender and feminine, though the shadows cast by the trees made it difficult to discern any more details. But there was something off. Their body seemed too still, too rigid. I took another cautious step forward, ignoring the alarm bells going off in my head. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice betraying my own fatigue. The figure remained silent, but now that I was closer, I could see something unsettling about their stance. It was almost mannequin-like, the way their limbs hung limply at their sides, the way their head tilted just a fraction too far. "Can you hear me?" I asked, my heart starting to race as I took another step closer. The figure didn't respond, but the eerie resemblance to a mannequin became more pronounced now that I was mere feet away from them. Their limbs were too still, their stance too rigid. Fear gripped me, yet I couldn't tear my gaze from the figure. I inched closer still, my exhaustion momentarily forgotten as my instincts screamed at me to back away. I was now within arm's reach of the figure, and the unease that had been building within me surged to a fever pitch. It was like looking at a life-size doll, its limbs frozen in an uncanny mannequin-like pose. I extended a trembling hand, my fingers hovering just above the figure's shoulder, hesitant to touch it, yet unable to back away. With a deep breath, I forced myself to gently touch the figure's shoulder. The moment my fingertips made contact, a frisson of fear shot down my spine. The skin felt wrong, too cool, too smooth, not at all like the skin of a living person. A wave of realization washed over me. This wasn't a person in need. This was something unnatural. As I stared deep into the depths of the shadowed face, I realized with horror that the figure before me wasn't alive. It was a mannequin, its body constructed to mimic a human form. I stumbled backward, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. This was no accident, no lost wanderer. Someone had placed this thing here, had tried to lure me into this clearing,